High-Tenet Krell adjusted its optical sensors. The dying red glow of the star Xylos casting long, distorted shadows across the observation deck of the Cathar science vessel, Logic's End. Below, the small, doomed human colony on the planetoid Erelin clung precariously to existence. The Cathar, a species priding themselves on their immutable logic and disdain for emotional inefficiencies, had studied humanity from afar for several cycles. Humans were deemed fragile, their lifespans laughably short, their societies driven by chaotic bursts of feeling. Hope, in the Cathar lexicon, was synonymous with sustained delusion. Primary analyst Vaughan confirmed the projected timeline for Xylos's final Nova stage. Krell's synthesized voice was flat, devoid of inflection. Vaughan, its multifaceted eyes fixed on a shimmering data panel, responded without turning. Natural projected timeline, approximately 3 Earth rotations. Societal collapse of the human colony, expected within 1 rotation, escalating to full systemic breakdown before the star's demise. And our intervention, Krell pressed. The Cathar High Command had sanctioned this mission not just for observation, but for a delicate, almost imperceptible push, a merciful acceleration of the inevitable. The goal was to collect uncontaminated data on a species' reaction to absolute, inescapable annihilation, free from the messy, unpredictable variable of prolonged, irrational hope. Our directed energy pulse, disguised as a precursor solar flare from Xylos, will expedite planetary atmospheric degradation and tectonic instability, Vaughan stated. Full environmental collapse leading to colony non-viability. Estimated zero point 0.5 Earth rotations. We anticipate textbook societal disintegration. Resource hoarding, internal conflict, abject despair, cessation of complex activities. Krell made a minute adjustment to its cranial structure, a Cathar equivalent of a nod. Excellent. The purity of the data will be unparalleled. Emotional responses are resource-draining variables. This experiment will provide definitive proof of their maladaptive nature in terminal scenarios. The Cathar believed that by understanding the collapse of what they considered a lesser species, they could further refine their own perfectly logical societal models, ensuring the Cathar Imperium remained efficient and eternal. They watched, expecting to see Erelin devolve into chaos as the environment rapidly soured. The atmospheric filters of the colony would soon be overwhelmed. The ground would shake. There was no escape. On Erelin, the human colonists, numbering less than 10,000, knew their star was dying. They had known for generations. Evacuation was impossible. Their small, self-sustaining outpost was a forgotten speck in the vastness of space, their original homeworld a distant, almost mythical memory. The Cathar's subtle push, the false flare, merely shortened a timeline they already perceived as desperately finite. The first tremors hit harder than anticipated. The air thinned, the taste of ash becoming a constant companion. Instead of the expected descent into panicked anarchy, something else happened. Something that didn't register on Cathar predictive models. In the largest remaining public square of the colony, beneath a flickering, energy-starved biodome, an elder named Elara stood before the assembled populace. Her face was lined, her body frail, but her voice, amplified by a simple sonic device, carried a strange steadiness. "The sky darkens," she said, her words simple, "and the ground groans. Our time here is ending sooner than we prayed for. We cannot save ourselves. This truth is heavy, but it is not the only truth." Aboard Logic's End, Krell and Vaughan observed, data streams pouring in. "Note, unusual communal gathering," Vaughan intoned. "Leader exhibiting calming pheromones, speech patterns indicative of motivational rhetoric. Primitive. Expected, but the lack of overt panic is anomalous." Krell leaned closer to its primary sensor feed. They are aware of the accelerated decline. Their atmospheric sensors, though crude, would detect it. Proceed with detailed emotional state analysis of the crowd. Elara continued, "We have always known we were a seed cast into the darkness. But even a dying flower can release its pollen to the wind. We cannot save our lives, but perhaps we can send a message of who we were." And then she outlined it. Not a plan for survival, for there was none, but a project. A colossal undertaking for a tiny, dying colony with dwindling resources and time. They would build a probe, a small, hardened vessel carrying the entirety of their cultural and biological legacy, their art, their music, their science, their genetic code, their philosophies, their histories of joy and sorrow, and a message. We were here, we lived, we hoped, we loved, remember us. The Cathar analysts were baffled. Resource allocation shift, Vaughan reported, its voice containing the faintest hint of what a human might call surprise. All non-essential power and materials are being diverted to the primary engineering dome. Scans indicate construction of a deep space projectile. Purpose, undetermined. Logically, they should be fortifying shelters, conserving breathable air. Krell felt a flicker of something, an uncatalogued processing error. A projectile. Against what? The star. Us. Their sensors cannot even reliably detect this vessel. Days passed on Erelin, each more desperate than the last. The sky was a bruised purple. The ground quaked almost constantly. The biodome was failing. Yet the humans worked. They worked in shifts, rationing food, water, and air. Children too small to operate machinery sorted components. The elderly, like Alara, offered guidance and encouragement, their frail hands helping where they could. There was no talk of rescue, no prayers for intervention. Just the hum of failing machinery, the clang of tools, and the low, determined murmur of human voices. They were not building a weapon. They were building a bottle to cast into the cosmic ocean. They are inputting cultural data, Vaughan said, its manipulators uncharacteristically still above its console. Music, art forms, philosophical texts, biological sequences. It appears to be a time capsule. Krell's optical sensors narrowed. For whom? The statistical probability of such a primitive probe, unguided, being intercepted by a spacefaring civilization capable of deciphering it is less than 0.00001%. It is a complete waste of their final, precious resources. It is illogical. The Cathar had anticipated riots over dwindling air supplies. They had expected a violent breakdown of social order. Instead, they saw humans sharing oxygen tanks, offering their meager rations to those laboring on the probe. They saw moments of grief, yes, deep and profound, as individuals succumbed to the failing environment. But these moments were followed by a return to the task, a quiet, shared determination. They saw humans comforting each other, holding hands, even singing soft, melancholic songs as they worked under the dying light. Their emotional state readings are contradictory, Vaughan reported, the usual crispness of its analysis faltering. Elevated stress hormones are present, as expected, but they are intertwined with endorphins, oxytocin, indicators of satisfaction, communal bonding. This is not conducive to survival. This is aberrant. Krell remained silent, its internal processors struggling to reconcile the incoming data with millennia of Cathar understanding of sentient behavior under duress. This wasn't the chaotic, self-destructive panic of a cornered animal. This was something else. This was purpose, stripped bare of any personal gain. The day the probe was ready, the colony was on its last breath. The biodome was cracked, the internal atmosphere thin and toxic. Xylos pulsed angrily in the sky, a malevolent crimson eye. The remaining colonists, weak but resolute, gathered at the makeshift launch gantry. Elara, supported by two younger engineers, touched the cold metal hull of the probe. "Go, little messenger," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Tell them we existed." With a shudder and a plume of carefully conserved propellant, the small probe, named Hope's Echo by the colonists, clawed its way into the darkening sky, a tiny spark against the overwhelming despair of a dying world. It carried no weapons, no shield, only a message of peace and remembrance, and a silent warning to any who might find it about the Cathar methods, subtly woven into their final historical logs as a cautionary tale of a cold, analytical force in the void. As the probe cleared the thinning atmosphere and began its lonely journey into the infinite, the remaining life support systems on Erelin finally, completely failed. The last human signals winked out. Aboard Logic's end, an unprecedented silence descended. Vaughan's optical sensors were fixed on the trajectory of Hope's echo as it vanished into the starfield. Krell did not move. The data streams had ceased. The experiment was over, but the expected conclusions were absent. "It is gone," Vaughan finally stated, its voice a low hum. "The colony has expired." Krell turned slowly. They knew. They knew they would not survive. They expended their last collective energy, their final resources, their dying breaths on a gesture with no conceivable logical benefit to their individual or collective survival. "Correct," Vaughan affirmed. "Statistically, an act of pure, unmitigated irrationality." "And yet," Krell mused, the word yet feeling alien in its synthesized vocalizations, "they achieved it. They faced absolute annihilation, not with chaotic despair, but with unified creative purpose. They saw no path to continued existence, so they forged a path for their memory to exist." The Cathar had always believed logic was the ultimate survival trait. That emotion was a flaw. But what they had witnessed was a species driven by an emotion, hope, perhaps, or something even more profound, like a defiant assertion of meaning in the face of ultimate meaninglessness, to achieve a monumental, albeit symbolic, act in their final moments. Their definition of survival appears to extend beyond biological continuation, Vaughan offered, a statement that bordered on heresy for a Cathar. Krell looked out at the now silent, dark planetoid. "We came here to observe the death of hope. Instead, we have witnessed its most potent, most inexplicable manifestation. They transformed their extinction into a statement, a message. They did not just die. They chose how their story would end, and in doing so, attempted to ensure it wouldn't truly end." The ship remained there for a long while, its hyperlogical crew grappling with a phenomenon that defied their every principle. The data was clear, but the interpretation shattered their paradigms. Days later, Krell addressed the Cathar High Command via secured transmission. Its report was concise, factual, yet carried an undertone that had never before been present in a Cathar communique. "The Erlen colony is extinct," Krell began. "Our intervention proceeded as planned. However, the human response deviated catastrophically from all predictive models. They did not collapse into primitive survival instincts. Faced with certain and imminent termination, they channeled all remaining resources into the creation and launch of a legacy probe. This act, devoid of any logical survival imperative, was executed with unwavering collective determination." Krell paused, then delivered the core of its terrifying revelation. The human capacity for what they term hope, an illogical belief in positive outcomes despite overwhelming contrary evidence, is not a weakness. It is a force capable of unifying them, driving them to acts of profound creation and defiance, even in the face of absolute oblivion. They did not seek to save their lives. They sought to project their essence beyond their death. "We have catalogued this species as fragile and emotionally unstable. This assessment is dangerously incomplete. Their emotional drivers, particularly this hope, can translate into a resilience and a form of existential defiance that our logic cannot currently process or predict. If a dying, isolated colony can achieve such a feat, what might their core worlds, their entire species, be capable of if truly threatened, if pushed to a point where this hope is their only remaining resource?" The transmission ended. The Cathar High Command was plunged into an unprecedented state of contemplative silence. The implications were staggering. A species that did not fear oblivion in the same way they did, a species that could find strength in the utterly illogical, was a variable they could not afford to miscalculate again. Logic's end turned from the dead world of Erelin, its mission to observe a simple collapse having transformed into an encounter with an existential mystery. The Cathar did not retrieve the Hope's echo. They let it travel on its impossible journey. They now understood that the contents of that probe, that defiant ember of human spirit, might be more potent, more dangerous, or perhaps more valuable than any weapon. Humanity was reclassified in the Cathar archives, no longer just fragile, or primitive. A new designation was created, one that sent ripples of unease throughout the Cathar Imperium. Omega-level existential paradox, a species to be observed with extreme caution, profound confusion, and a new, entirely illogical sensation that some Cathar analysts hesitantly identified from ancient, forbidden texts as awe. The galaxy was vast, but the echo of that tiny probe, launched by dying hands sustained by an indomitable hope, resonated far beyond its physical reach, straight into the cold, logical heart of the Cathar. They had intended to witness an ending, but they had instead glimpsed a terrifying, beautiful, and utterly alien form of infinity.